Minister, I don't bear any ill will against yourself or indeed Mrs. Stone, who I believe did a lot of good work in Dublin inner city. And the only problem I see, he was ahead of his time. He was a visionary, because you were seeing it fall until you met him, until 2011, and he changed tracks, so you had a coalition before ever you decided to go into coalition with Micheál Martin. Minister, perhaps the most alarming thing about this entire saga is highlights to us all that the barriers between political and business classes that existed in this country are now almost inseparable, and this is certainly not good time for politics, or good for any of us. In fact, your diary states that you had 12 meetings with Mr. Stone during your term as Minister of Finance. Your actions as Minister for Finance was always to bet for the bankers, and bet for the vulture funds, and bet for everything else. In your last actions before you left office as Minister for Finance to go to where you are now was to allow the bankers to get their bonus back again. Now we have over 50 bankers earning £1.5 million plus. Why do people need that kind of money to live in this country? And why are you backing so hard for them? To move on to some questions, please, if I could. You told me the last day that you told the nation on that press conference that Sunday that the posters went up at night. But I asked you the last day, and it's clear as day, they went up in daylight. So do you know the day from the night, or the dark from the daylight? So please could you answer that today and clarify, as we know now that that's not the case. Minister, as I said, in what manner were the tickets that you sold to Mr. Stone, what manner of payment? Were they paid credit card, cash, cheque or whatever, bank draft or what was it, or was it pound notes? As I said, Minister, the valuation for the posters presented by you is not credible. Can you provide full breakdown of how you arrived at the figure of 1,057 figure? Because other candidates in your constituency documented figures of around 5,000. And we all know the cost, and we all appreciate the volunteers and the help that we get. We couldn't manage without them, families, friends and everybody else to put up a few posters. So, I mean, it's not easy. But as I said, Minister, your valuation seems to be very, very much skewed. And my understanding is now there's a second complaint gone in against into SIPO. So, I mean, that's going to take up more time. And this clearly, Minister, the whole saga is taking away from people on trolleys, people on waiting lists, people are waiting for so many other issues, not to mention the housing list and everything else. But as I said to you, you've handled this in a very poor manner, and I think it's time that you put it to bed. Let's move on and try and run the country for the ordinary people that we are supposed to represent, not for the golden circles that seem to exist. And I'm not going to make any allegations about contracts, but we all know what's happening.
Minister.
So the only part of your statement I want to acknowledge in a positive way is the recognition that you have made of the work that Mr. Stone did in the North East in the city. This is an approach that many other TDs in this House have called for to be replicated in other parts of the country. And one of the driving forces of the success of it was the work that he did. It is one of the many reasons why, of course, I deeply regret how this issue is developed, and deeply regret that I'm in a position having to make the case for it and defend it in the Dáil. In relation to the 4 points that you've put to me, number one, the fact that some posters may have been put up during the day. I said at the time, we're referring to an election in 2016, that is nearly 7 years ago, and it is possible that some of them went up both in the day and at night. And I accepted that. And it's why subsequently I said 4 different dates, I think is what I said. Because it's hard enough to remember what happened 7 years ago with posters going up, and I acknowledged that some could have happened during the day. In relation to how the tickets were purchased, I'm afraid I don't know that. But you know, that is a private matter. But what I can assure you is that all of the sale of the tickets has been done in a way that is compliant with SIPO law. But I made the decision to reveal and to indicate the purchase of these tickets in the House because I felt it was a relevant matter that the House should be aware of. In relation to the issue of the valuation of the posters, so you have made reference to the €5,000 figure, which I think comes from my constituency colleague, Senator Mary Fitzpatrick. I think it's worth again just emphasising to the House that the difference between the two different figures is the fact that the vast majority of the posters that were put up in all my election campaigns were put up by friends, family, volunteers using their private vehicles. And actually, which is what is so regrettable about this, is the actual amount of activity that I now understood was not provided in a voluntary way, which has led me to revise my election expenses statements, was a relatively small share of all of the activity that was going on. But for other election campaigns, they, it appears to me, had most of their posters put up in a commercial way, which is the reason for the difference in the figures.
Mattie,
and then in relation to the second complaint, that's a matter for SIPO rather than for me, but I'll engage with them on any matter they raise with me.
Very briefly.
Yeah, briefly, the Minister said on radio and report here that he sold the tickets to Mr Stone. Now he can't tell us how he, was it cash, cheque, bank card, credit card, was it some of the new currencies that you have, crypto or something? Surely you can remember, you said so many, but you don't know. Simple question, should be clarified.
Minister, briefly, very briefly.
Obviously it wasn't in cash, and as I said to you, the purchase of the tickets and how they were registered has all happened in a way that must be compliant with the standards and public office guidelines, but I felt it was appropriate, given the interest in this matter, to voluntarily declare that information.